Welcome you to the Medical Center Hour, to the beginning of the spring semester of the Medical Center Hour. I'm Marcia Day Childress from the Center for Biomedical Ethics and Humanities. The Center for Biomedical Ethics and Humanities produces the Medical Center Hour, and we're now starting the second half of our 40th season of continuous production. Our program today is called Listening/Looking as Collaboration, a poet and a painter create together. Both award-winning and nationally recognized in their own fields, poet Gregory Orr and painter Trisha Orr have been married for almost 40 years. They've worked hard, as all artists must, to develop mastery of their chosen arts. But on 4 distinct occasions, they have also experimented with collaborative projects. In each case, the collaborative process challenged them to grow beyond the narrowing definitions of their previous work. And each collaboration, while not always easy, yielded insights and growth that registered in each artist's subsequent work. So we welcome today English professor Gregory Orr on my immediate right and Charlottesville painter Trisha Orr to his right, prominent members of our local community of creative artists. You'll find their brief biographical sketches in your handout. But in the course of this hour, in the course of becoming acquainted with some of their work, we'll learn much more about them, as individual artists to be sure, and as a collaborative team. Now, should you wish to delve further into Greg and Trisha Orr's work, the UVA bookstore is here today with books of Greg Orr's poetry and prose writing. The books are for sale just outside the upstairs entrance to the auditorium. And I think that Greg would be happy to sign any copies that you have as well. In addition, Trisha Orr has an exhibition upcoming next month at Washington and Lee University in Lexington, at which work from their recent collaborations will be featured. And in your handout, the exhibition title is there and the dates for this exhibit in Lexington. And I hope some of you will take a trip across the mountain and do that. As well as providing us with a richly illustrated narrative of their collaborative projects. So this is going to be a feast for our ears and our eyes in this dull winter season. But this Medical Center Hour with the Orrs also considers the challenges for any accomplished professional involved in stepping outside the boundaries of one's own expertise and field in order to engage creatively with and potentially to be changed by another person's perspective. Now, there might be some analogies here for health professions and for health professional schools that are emboldened to devise interprofessional learning initiatives, or for healthcare organizations venturing toward truly collaborative practice. So interestingly, in this instance, perhaps the arts can help to show us the way. What's required for authentic and successful collaboration across professions? What personal qualities come to the fore in participants to foster and facilitate collaborative work? What can sabotage collaborative work? What are the risks and the payoffs, the effects and the consequences, immediate, long-term, and lasting, of collaborative practice? So now a poet and a painter will tell us a little bit about that and show us as well. So welcome, Greg and Trisha Orr.
Thank you. We're collaborating, but we're going to alternate rather than speak simultaneously. That'll be our first cooperation. Over 40 years ago, Trisha and I met, and we decided we would grow alongside each other. That time I was a young poet who just had his first book accepted, and she was an aspiring painter. Can everybody hear me? Our life paths ran closely parallel, even as our art paths wandered off in this or that direction in search of what we needed to keep our art strong. And yet at least 4 times it seems right to say that our artistic paths intersected and actual collaborations between poetry and painting took place.
Can everybody hear me? I hope. In the early 1990s, I began a series of still life paintings painted from observation. It's a series which I continue to work on to this day. In these still lives, I'm interested in visual complexity and precise observation. I work from setups, not from photographs, and try to inhabit the edge where absolute clarity emerges from chaotic profusion of shape, color, and texture. The titles of these paintings are my own, and these titles became the subject of Greg's poems. This first group is from a show that I had at Peninsula Fine Arts, I think in 1996.
Short digression. When I was young, I wanted to be a painter. I love the way that people standing in front of a painting seem to enter into a kind of trance. I could see they were looking carefully at the painting, but that also there were moments when their eyes and faces showed that they were lost in their own thoughts, memories and daydreams which the painting had stimulated. I know now that that paradoxical state of absorption trance is best called reverie. I also know that it's a state that readers of lyric poetry sometimes enter into, though usually they're alone with a book of poems. I love seeing people in that state in galleries and museums. They look both vulnerable and centered at the same moment. Now, in my initial excitement about our first collaboration, which it must be said, I talked my way into. Trisha had been invited to put her paintings on the wall of Peninsula Fine Arts in a show of her still life. I managed to wheedle my way into this by trying to offer something that I don't know, they were too polite to refuse. So I said, I'd love to write some little poems to go alongside your paintings. There is a long tradition in poetry called ekphrasis, which is poems written about paintings or sculpture. I felt that I was aware of certain images and stories that were latent in these still life paintings. I didn't think they were just a huge, complex collection of things, but there were also like stories and stuff. I teased out narrative situations and implications from the figures on the cups and teapots and the creatures on the cloth. And for example, you can see here this owl and stuff. And in the next few paintings, you'll see lots of what are called satsumi cups. I believe it's satsumi. Little cups and teapots and stuff painted with figures and scenes and so forth. So I saw these landscapes and stories there, and I know Trisha did also, but I was eager to point them out with words. So this is called the owl teapot. Isn't an owl a night bird? Shouldn't it sit in black branches beneath its patron goddess, the moon? But here it is in broad day, its eyes agog with wonder, astonished at the colors and textures the bright music light makes, striking all objects till they vibrate like a drum. Number of the titles were Trisha's titles. They were taken from Emily Dickinson poems, like Rowing in Eden.
And I titled it Rowing in Eden because I don't know if you can see it in the slide, but there's a female figure on that cup, and she seemed to be in a pool of blue, so I like Rowing in Eden.
And there we have a dragon, which is a kind of shows up in pools in a lot of Asian stories. So, Rowing in Eden. I don't think the princess fears the dragon in the blue pool. It's not that kind of paradise. The only danger here is that she'll see and feel too much. But isn't that what our senses crave? Intensity? Crave more of it even than they can bear? Rumor of Delirium, again, a line from Emily Dickinson.
Yeah, these were titled before the collaboration was started. And I titled it Rumor of Delirium because it just looked kind of delirious.
There you go. And, well, Room of Delirium. How we live inside our little dramas. Painted figures, each on our separate vase. And the world surrounds us with its glory. It calls us to wake up. How is it we don't hear the tulips roaring louder than trumpets? How do we miss them, the dogwoods, that even now are having thoughts of us? I mentioned stories, but the thing I think of most when I think of this first collaboration is me kind of pointing at things. Hey, look at this, look at that. Hey, look. And pointing in some element of lecturing.
And this was not my title, because the title of this painting was, I think, Still Life with Spider Mums or something. So
It becomes look. Look at that shell in the corner. Isn't it an ear that is listening? And aren't those vases really shells standing upright? As if they were even more alert and listening with all their being. The flowers that lean out from the vases, aren't they also a yearning to come closer to the mystery, to poke their heads right down into it and see what it's all about? And it's a poem called Floating World. Again, it was Trisha's title. She took it from Japanese Buddhism, where it was originally a term for the kind of ephemeral nature of the material world. The Japanese in particular became deeply involved with the beauty of vanishing, a bittersweet beauty that treasures say cherry blossoms because they're the briefest of the fruit blossoms. Floating World is both a celebration and a lament about how brief beauty is. Floating world. What perishes is most precious, they say. Cherry blossoms so much more lovely than those of plum or apple, precisely because they only last for 2 days, the briefest of visits. Their task was to praise the most fleeting connections we make between ourselves and this world, like two swallows up here, like two swallows in mid-flight, meeting beak to beak. And so she gazes on the flowers that blossom and wilt. She gazes undismayed.
Okay, so in 2000, we were actually invited to collaborate by Meridian Magazine, and the results were eventually shown at the University of Virginia Art Museum. So when the editor of Meridian asked Greg to write poems to accompany the paintings that he was publishing, I asked him to do something different. It could sound ungrateful, and I think it is ungrateful, but I have never been a fan of phrases, of poems about paintings.
Tells me.
No, I was trying to be polite, but I've never liked it. Because it seems to me that the best ones, the really terrific ones, like Rilke's poem about the archaic torso of Apollo, or Audin's painting about the poem about the Bruegel painting, The Fall of Icarus, for me, they replace the visual event. They overwhelm the visual event. And so maybe I was threatened by by the idea that poems, that language can do that. You know, I hoped that the paintings were interesting enough to stand on alone without literary commentary, that the paintings could tell their own stories. So at this point, when we decided to do this a second time, I suggested something different. I asked Greg if it was possible that he could write poems that would be equivalent to the paintings, not descriptive of them. Poems that would take the viewer into a space that resonated with the space that the paintings made, that they would resonate but not describe.
So that became the kind of key word for this second collaboration, equivalence. Truth is, she startled me into the idea of writing this second round. I realized I'd need to stop pointing at the paintings. I'd also have to abandon the impulse to make up stories about them. No more princesses and dragons in the pool, no more gods. No more gods strolling in the cloud-topped mountains. How to find words and rhythms that were equivalent to the visual intensity of Eros and Jeopardy that I saw in her work. How to create out of words a poetic state as she did with pigment, that state that's both poised and perilous. Because I think, you know, these still lifes that she paints, I mean, they're very highly focused, but there's a constant chaos happening inside them, intensity. Anyway, I felt a lot less confident, more aware of risk-taking in my own art form when we went into this second project. Some of the answers came in choosing certain words that I felt were as saturated with significance as the cobalt blue kimono that she sometimes used in her still life. I found intensity and density in her work. Intensity is highly valued in lyric poetry. I just had to let go pointing at things in her painting and making up little narratives, little stories, sometimes little lectures, which is even more. Who was I to lecture? To use her words, quote, I had to become the emotional fabric of the paintings, end quote. To become that as words, images, sounds, rhythms, emotional tone. For example, Floating World. We came back to this one when I accepted her challenge because it's one of my favorites of her still lifes. This time I decided to stop talking about the painting and instead to let myself fall under its spell. Gave myself over to the imaginings that the painting set going in me. This is a new poem. One and by one we come to this place, and those with companions are also alone. Sky and earth and all the world before us. It's possible to imagine the tree standing by itself, but also the flowers, how the weight of so much being bows them down. Yes. My title? Wasn't yours, was it? It's not the painting title, was it?
I think it was called Yes Without the Lexicon, and I just decided so it was.
There we are. Yes, it is. Yes, yes. Burden and blessing, two blossoms on the same branch. To be so lost in this radiant wilderness. One of the things about poet William Blake urges us to see the world in a visionary way, which was one of the things that was happening to me through looking at Trisha's paintings. And he talks about celebrating our ability to, quote, see a world in a grain of sand and a heaven in a wildflower. Now, lyric poets tend to see a world in a single word. Mysterious depths open up inside a single word or a phrase. For example, the word paradise is an Arabic word that originally meant walled garden. And you think of the contrast between the desert world and that enclosed space filled with fountains and flowers and birdsong. It seemed to me that Trisha's canvases were themselves the shape of rectangular gardens filled to bursting with concentrated life energy. They were equivalents of that. Another word that her painting suggested to me was lightning, an image for the kind of zigzag intensity with which diagonals raced across her compositions. So this is one called Paradise Corner. It has both the paradise and the lightning in it. Paradise Corner. Pleasure space crammed with flowers, fountains, all the joys earth affords, hidden behind high walls. Crack, lightning zap, I press my eyes against. Glimpse of paradise that makes me long for more. Blue Peninsula. Lightning crack of ravish, to rip the sky, then vanish. Tatter flag I raise, shredded blue above dazed battlements. It's dazzling. Was it only a moment ago I was lifted up, slipped free of this shroud that veils my eyes and weights my limbs, and saw below me the pattern clear at last, dazzling labyrinth. Zip-zap. Here you can see, well, here I see this kind of diagonal of intensity moving through. Zip-zap. The lightning stroke, a rainbow bolt, tore right through you and is already speeding past the stars. All this you see, dance of dazzle and debris, is aftermath.
In 2006, we were invited again to collaborate, this time for a show that was taking place at the 2nd Street Gallery here in Charlottesville. The theme of the exhibit was love, and there were, the structure of the exhibit was many pairs of writers and visual artists were asked to collaborate on the theme of love. I thought that it would only be fair to reverse the way that we structured earlier efforts. Greg had done all of the work in the earlier efforts, and I had just, really not just provided the fodder. Also, I thought it was especially important that I work from Greg's poems because he was writing this amazing sequence of poems based on the beloved, and this theme, the poems just work perfectly with the gallery's theme. I did know that a realist still life on the subject of love would be very corny, and I felt very strongly that his poems deserved better than that. I wondered if there was any way that I could make a painting that used the text of a poem as subject matter. I've always been a realist painter, as you can see. I've always painted what's in front of my eyes. I didn't have a clue about how to make a non-objective painting that embodied a poem rather than illustrated it. I especially didn't want to make something that looked like a greeting card. The comment of a painter friend gave me a direction. My friend mentioned that the abstract expressionist painter Willem de Kooning once said that whenever he got stuck, his remedy was to go back to the grid the underlying geometric structure of the picture plane, and that was his prescription for any painter in trouble. It turned out to be very useful advice for me. I made a series of brick-based paintings using Greg's poems as subject matter, trying to make paintings, not posters, of poems. What that meant to me was that the formal attributes of painting, light, space, color, and surface, were the means of structuring the composition. That's sort of what we were taught in art school when I went through. The fact that a painting is made up of color and brush strokes and oil paint was more important than that the text be absolutely legible. I did want to honor the poems to the extent that it would be possible to read them on the canvas if one tried hard enough, but legibility was secondary to the painting's formal qualities. In translating the poems to the canvas, I tried to do what I had suggested Greg do of the equivalence. I tried to inhabit the emotional space inside each word or phrase and turn it into light, color, space, and paint. With this approach, some words were easy to read, but others had to be teased out by the viewer. And so in addition to being part of the Love Letter Invitational, these poem paintings were eventually published in two magazines, Smartish Pace and Rattle. I think it was another money. So there's the first
So
one.
here we go. These paintings were a huge shift for Trish to switch from a lifelong devotion to careful observation and rendering to the creation of an abstract space dominated by words. But the poems were also a huge shift for me. They were all of them parts of a long sequence of brief, untitled lyrics that explore issues of love and loss and resurrection through art and poetry. The resurrection they celebrate and dramatize is one of emotional engagement with the natural world and with the other we often call the beloved. These poems are transparent in that the language is extremely simple and the poems themselves are meant to be accessible meditations. The beloved is whoever or whatever one loves most. For many of us, the beloved is a person, but it could also be a creature or even a place. The relation between oneself and the beloved is where lyric meaning is born. The relation between self and beloved is itself meaning. I don't think I could have written these poems, by the way, and this is something that I've come to realize, is I could not have written these poems if I hadn't been launched into a kind of strangeness by what we've been calling the equivalent poems. It was a way in which I was letting go of a lot of things in order to write the equivalent poems, and I think it loosened me up and made these poems possible. Autumn and the days grow shorter, squeezing the same radiance into a smaller space. More intense than ever, the beloved's lust for us. She must know we too are getting ready to become a poem. To be alive, not just the carcass, but the spark. That's crudely put, but if we're not supposed to dance, why all this music? Voice of the beloved, searching me out, seeking me, speaking herself first, speaking his own being in order to awaken mine. Grief will come to you, grip and cling all you want, it makes no difference. Catastrophe, it's just waiting to happen. Loss, you can be certain of it. Flow and swirl of the world, carried along as if by a dark current. All you can do is keep swimming. All you can do is keep singing. Loss and loss and more loss. That's what the sea teaches. The need to stay nimble against the suck of receding waves, the sand disappearing under our feet. Here, where sea meets shore, the best of dancing floors. Occult, one of the things that I got into with these poems was the power and excitement and magic of language itself, which was the phenomena that I was, as a poet, most deeply involved with. And one of the things that just amazed me, I came to feel that one function of poetry, one function of language is to resurrect, to bring back to life inside us things. And that's which got me to thinking how amazing the alphabet is, that you can just recombine it into everything in the world. It's just incredible to me. But anyway, cult power of the alphabet. How it combines and recombines into words that resurrect the beloved every time. Breaking open the dry bones of each letter, seeking the secret of life that must be hidden inside. We're done? Oh, I'm pausing here. Here we go. Well, you've seen 3 collaborations here so far. In the first 2, I'm in Trisha's territory. That's not so unusual in our culture, for a guy to casually move into a woman's territory, presume what he's doing is inherently interesting and worth doing. First collaboration, I was a guy colonizing her territory for her, so it might seem or feel. You know, I was horning into her show. In the second, the equivalence, there was a bit of a pushback from the painter and urging a big shift in my project. In the third, when she began painting the poems, she was in my territory. The attention was flattering, but I also felt how it could be experienced as a little aggressive and presumptuous. For example, even though she's my constant critic for my poems, I mean, it helps me edit them. For example, in a few of these poem paintings, Trisha dropped individual words. Once, she dropped an entire line from a poem because she didn't think it was so good. That's interesting. So ultimately, collaboration is in part about give and take and flexibility. It involves mutual respect, but it also has the power to engender insecurity, which one must then wrestle with as gracefully as one can in order to go on so that we can both keep growing.
But you know, it also, people see things differently in a collaboration, because I experienced this process very differently, and I thought about it in different terms. I didn't feel colonized by the the first poems, but I didn't feel excited either. The first poems, they didn't teach me anything, and they didn't teach me anything I didn't already know. By contrast, the equivalence seemed extraordinary because they felt very new. I felt that they led both writer and reader into the unknown. When I offered to make the poem paintings for the third collaboration, I didn't experience it as colonization. I felt that I owed him, you know, some work with this stuff, that it wasn't fair that he do all of the heavy lifting. And I also felt that I was respecting these new poems that he was writing that I really loved, poems from concerning the book, which is The Body of the Beloved. They seemed to me to be love poems addressed to the world, and I just really wanted to to do something with them. I didn't know if I could, but I offered to do it. I did change some things, but after all, I was trying to make paintings using art school traditions, and I was being dutiful. I was trying to follow the art school rules that I had been taught about light, color, space, composition, stuff like that. Even attempting to do this stuff, I was so far out of my comfort zone, that it was nuts. Okay.
On with the nuts. Now the fourth book.
Our fourth collaboration. Okay, so by 2010, I thought I'd finished with the poem paintings, that I'd done everything I could with them, and there weren't any more discoveries to make. But that same year, I was diagnosed with a serious illness, and during the course of a year of difficult treatments, my relationship to those poems changed. I'd always admired them, but during my illness and treatment, I came to feel that those paintings gave me, those poems, not the paintings, but the poems. Yeah, the poems gave me the courage, faith, and hope that I needed to live vitally. To honor my new understanding of these poems, I repainted some of the earlier canvases that I had done, even some of the ones that you saw there, so that the text would be easier to read, bolder and more graphic, although they were still concerned with painterly surface, but I really wanted them to be totally legible. And I cared less about the things that I had learned in art school. Then I began to work on new paintings based on the poems that I loved most. I decided to use the format of a flag, and I thought of these new paintings as prayer flags, a combination of the Buddhist prayer flag, which incorporates the healing message, and a nation's flag, which proclaims allegiance, a banner under which I could gather my spiritual and emotional forces. And I feel very lucky to have chanced into a collaboration which has led me into such unexpected places in my work. And for me, that's what's so amazing about the act of collaboration, is that you just end up learning things that you never would have learned if you had just stuck with your own path.
Takes us out to places we can get to on our own.
Mm-hmm.
Squander it all, hold nothing back. The heart's a deep well, and when it's empty, it will fill again. Balanced at the edge of speech, but the slope is so steep. To speak is to leap, wanting to, but afraid. Instead, merely gazing at the beloved from the high cliff of love. So many were only given the dream of love. So many given just a glimpse, and that from a great distance. Who am I to be ungrateful, who saw the beloved face to face? River inside the river, world within the world. All we have is words to reveal the rose that the rose obscures. And here you see that flag structure. To be alive, we do enjoy saying this, to be alive, not just the carcass, but the spark. That's crudely put, but if we're not supposed to dance, why all this music?
There's a difference in, it's the same poem, but different formats. And, so now it's 2012, and I still find myself, I'm back to doing the complicated still lives that I love so much. But I still find myself drawn to using Greg's work, even though I am over my year of treatment at this excellent hospital. So here's something new.
And here they're just almost evolving past legibility into a kind of energy and texture.
It's really just about surface now.
Now, yeah, we've been talking about humble dazzle of autumn, these leaves on the ground, each one a page in the book, a poem that says, I lived, I was a small part of the story, this is my song, this is my glory. Weren't we more than electricity and dust? Weren't we the hours we lay beside each other? Weren't we the marks we made on the page? Weren't we the days we knew we had a purpose, and every step we took was praise? Now, my final comment before we open up to talking is that, for those you saw those last few, where Trisha's evolving, and you may recall that in my early ambition to be a painter, for which I had neither gifts nor nerve, and yet, just don't lose it, the longing. So, it's possible that I'm going to be able to try to, with her help, setting up a kind of a canvas as if it were a blackboard. Several of my students are in the audience today, and they know that if you put me in front of a blackboard, I get weird and start writing and drawing and doing this kind of
They're
thing.
beautiful things.
So she says,
After the class,
operating on the assumption that there may be something interesting in what I write up there, it's occurred to me that I would love to kind of do this kind of blackboard dance with words on a canvas and see what happens. So in a bizarre kind of way, the collaboration at this moment is kind of diverging as we go back into each of our own arts, and with, for me, I would say, with the courage and envy to want to do this visual thing again, which I just, as I say, I just love that. So that's where we are. And what we'd like to do now is ask if you have any questions or comments or anything like that, and to thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. Wow, what beautiful images and words, and what gorgeous collaborations. I hope that when we have a generous amount of time, so that I hope there's opportunity for many of you to register your impressions and to ask your questions about the sorts of collaborations that occurred and that resulted in the work that we've seen and heard. I will bring the microphone around to those of you who have comments and questions, and we'll start the conversation. When I give you the mic, please let us know who you are.
Hi, my name is Eric Hewlett. I'm on the School of Medicine faculty. You described Trisha doing editing of some sort of your poems, and I'm trying to figure out how that could be reciprocal. What could ever be done? Are you already done with a painting? What kind of input can go the other direction?
Well, I'll invite him into he'll come into the studio. My studio's in my home, so so he'll just come in, and I'll ask him questions and ask him paintings and develop.
But do you mean editing in helping me work on my writing, or editing when she gets to the painting?
I meant in the writing.
Oh, in the
the
writing.
editing of the writing. I guess because then it all comes together. But prior to that, when you're deciding what the basis is for the whole work.
Yeah, did you put some of those words back into those paintings?
Well, they were
Actually,
already out of my hands.
We won't go
At
there.
that point. But I've apologized many times.
Not at the time she did it. She obviously thought it was the right thing to do. And so this is a combination of the give and take, but we work in a kind of almost adjacent spaces. So while she's working on her paintings, you know, I'll be seeing them as they evolve. I wouldn't put a lot of money on my skills as a responder to visual art. I've trained her, and she's trained herself to be very good at editing poetry, as far as I can tell. And as I say, we just do that back and forth. These things are kind of like coming together, but I mean, on the everyday, going along our own discrete paths, we just, you know, it's one of the advantages of not only being married, but actually working in pretty almost next door spaces. So when one of us gets bored, we go meddle where the others are.
Is that?
That work?
Yeah.
God, is it that boring? Here's,
I'm Margaret Warren from the School of Medicine, and I was struck by the quote, Trisha, that you gave from Bill de Kooning about when he gets stuck, he goes back to the grid, the structure of things, and you explained so clearly. And by the way, thank you for this wonderful presentation. It's been great. What I'd be interested in is great hearing from you whether that also applies to you when you get stuck. What does it mean for you if you do that, to go back to the grid structure of what you're doing?
yeah, what a wonderful question. And writer's block. To a group of psychoanalysts. Boy, that's going to be weird. You think I'm going to get like free treatment? I don't know. No. Yeah.
Go back to the grid. There's your talk.
I go back to the grid? But I don't know what the grid would be in poetry. I don't know what the grid would be in poetry. That was a really, you know, a wonderful thing for her, because that was a big leap to go from looking at the world. What do I return to when I'm lost in poetry? I am so often lost in poetry, I do not know. And what a great question. Unfortunately, we do not have an answer. That's a really good question, and there is no answer. That's it.
My name is Catherine Reynolds. How did you shift from thinking descriptively about the paintings to when you changed that to be something more parallel with the paintings?
How did I do that?
Yes, how did you shift?
She pushed me. And I never would have done the leap by myself. I mean, I was, you know, I was excited to be up on the wall next to her work, which I think is so dazzling. But as I say, I was sort of commenting on, by and large, when we talk about poetry, lyric poetry, which I sort of teach the writing of most of my life, we try to avoid commentary. We try to encourage the student or the writer to let it emerge from the self and take form, and then we reshape the form that it takes and stuff like that. But as usual with teachers, it was hard for me to take my own advice or to hear my own advice being directed to me. But that's what I think I was being encouraged to do, is to let go of things I knew, or let go of the control I had over the paintings by making up little stories and that I thought were interesting and so forth. But that really were also kind of lifelines for me. When I say that the later poems, the beloved poems and stuff, they are really very weird for me. They're very unusual poems, and I'm very happy with them. I kind of date the second half of my writing life to those beloved poems. But I've come to realize that the equivalence, in a way, by being pushed into that, into writing those parallel poems parallel to her paintings, I moved into a territory that would make it possible to write the beloved poems for me. I'm still trying to understand this, you know. It's not something I could like sit down and write an essay about, but it kind of freed me up to do a lot more razzle-dazzle than I was used to doing in poetry. I used to be a pretty melancholy poet, but I think these paintings are kind of ecstatic, you know, celebratory. And I think moving toward a language that could try to be more celebratory was something that changed for me. Also, wordplay and puns and stuff like that, things that in my older writing, I thought were illegal or cheating or whatever, I don't remember. They weren't serious enough, whatever. Now I kind of enjoy them. I mean, and that was another kind of shift. To me, it was like working with language differently, the way that she, by going from observation to abstraction, she shifted a whole way of seeing the world visually.
And you know, for me, the incredible gift was I had always made this kind of mastery my, you know, what I was working very hard for, and I was really getting a little bored with it. And
Mastery of observation and rendering.
Yeah, the mastery of, you know, just looking at something that was really hard to see and getting, and, you know, being able to nail it. So the disorder that came into my work through doing these things has really revitalized my still lives. You know, there's just they're just a lot more fun, a lot more interesting. There's a lot more disorder. I'm doing them with palette knives now rather than little brushes. so
you're
you know,
messing around.
So really, you know, I was, in one sense, I think I can see now at the end of a kind of road when with those still lives, and I don't feel that way at all anymore. So I just really received amazing gifts.
Trisha and I, psychologically and sort of aesthetically as artists, we've talked a lot for our whole lives together about order and disorder. You know, the painting, poems, it's a lot about ordering your world, making sense out of it. But a totally ordered world is a closed, stifling, boring world. So the whole thing is how do you get disorder into it, how do you get a vitalizing disorder, and how to get a kind of excitement in. She, of course, got disorder in with the huge profusion of stuff like that.
But once it wasn't a challenge, it was boring.
Right, once you've gotten that mastery, then it becomes, how do you keep the mastery from turning boring? Ditto for me with painting. Once I got to a certain, poems, once I got to, we get confused. Once you get to a certain point where you can, you know how to do things with poems, you can start to really bore yourself or not challenge yourself enough. And I think that's one of the things both of us, I would say, the difference is we're getting more expressive and more of the risk-taking that's come in from these collaborations. And the risk-taking that leads to a growth that you can't predict, but that,
A kind of painful growth.
yeah, you know, sometimes it's painful. It certainly reminds you that insecurity.
Of how little you can do.
Sure.
You know.
What the heck? Both of us came out of traumatic backgrounds, you know, psychologically, biographically, autobiographically. And for us, one of the attractions of art had to do with order. You know, I mean, that's a powerful psychological motive for art making, personal art making, is you come out of a chaotic or traumatized background, and you're trying to make sense of the world. Me with language, she with the stability of paintings of an observed world, and yet, you know, to be alive, you have to open yourself to.
Yeah, my desire in my earlier paintings was to find how much chaos I could order.
Or even subdue.
Well, no, order. You know, to observe.
Yeah.
After Eugene Scheck, and a public person, after the trauma of your medical illness, I thought your words were more intense about life and about love.
I think that's probably the
So
case.
the
Thank
therapy
you.
or the therapeutic effort there seems clear to me.
Thank you.
Amen.
Sebastian, one meets the Department of English.
Oh, wait for the mic, please.
I know this guy.
Well,
Roger.
we'd like it on tape, too.
Be honest, Sebastian.
Sebastian Koga, from neurosurgery. How is it different writing these poems about the paintings of Trisha versus the paintings of anyone else? And conversely, the poems, painting the poem, Greg's poems, versus someone else, because it seems like there must be something more to this partnership than just art reinterpreting art.
Well, I wouldn't have tried to work from anyone else's poems just because I don't know. I don't think I would have done it.
It's dangerous. Good decision. No, but she was, but you did title your paintings from Emily Dickinson's poems.
Well, that was before we even.
Right.
That was because
So there was.
I felt I just loved the spaces that her poems made, and felt as if the paintings were sort of also dealing with a kind of chaotic.
Plus intensity. I mean,
you know,
Dickinson is all about intensity. If anybody here thinks Emily Dickinson is just about butterflies and birds, they don't. They haven't read the right poems. You know, she's really. She makes Sylvia Plath look like she's on Quaaludes or something. But anyway, so I think I wrote one or two poems about paintings. I think I wrote about Botticelli's Birth of Venus once and stuff. It was a smart aleck poem. I like it. And I don't know. I don't have any impulse to write about other painters. And I certainly know I would be insanely jealous if she decided to paint somebody else's poems, so don't get your hopes up. Sebastian is a poet as well as a neurosurgeon, and he's promised at a certain crucial point to replace my brain when it gets to the point where it's really clear I can't go on. So.
I'm afraid we've come to the end of the hour, so we can't let you go on. But I'd like to thank both Trisha Orr and Greg Orr for taking some risks with an audience as well, and talking about what your work is and how it goes and what it means to you and the kinds of things that are there for us to see and think about. We'd invite you to come back next week. We have the AOA lecture for the School of Medicine. Coming from Indiana University School of Medicine is Professor of Radiology Richard Gunderman, who will be talking about and I guess fitting in the month of February, enhancing male performance. So be here, don't miss it. Thank you so much. I think so.